Hello and welcome to another episode of Frame and Reference. I'm your host, Kenny McMillan, and you're listening to episode 103 with Charlie Gruet, DP of the other two. Enjoy.
Like a little backstory on me is like I lived in LA and kind of came up through LA, just working, doing all sorts of stuff. Basically, gripped, electric, camera, did location scouting. I did a lot of still photography, a little still photography assisting. So when I moved east, I was mostly in the documentary space. I was shooting advertising, but mostly like real people advertising. And I was doing documentary work. So then I basically was like, I never saw myself going into documentary. It's just like the opportunities arose. And so I went to them. And then eventually I was like, okay, I want to change paths and go more towards scripted stuff. So the creative community here is, I do think there was a lot of, or at least from my entrance into it, was kind of through knowing people who did UCB. And I met some people who did UCB New York, and then I started working on projects with them, and that kind of opened up some avenues to some other stuff. And then also, quite honestly, I met Ben Sinclair and Katja Blichfeld, the two creators of High Maintenance. And I met Ben on like a short web series that he was acting in. And he was like, hey, my wife and I, they were married at the time. He's like, my wife and I are going to do this web series. Would you be down to shoot it? Would you want to be
like involved? 08 maybe?
Yeah. And this was no, you know what it was? It was probably 2012, 2011.
Yeah.
2012. Yeah. So
peak of web seriesing.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And so, through him and Katja, I met, and Russell Gregory, another guy who involved in the creation of that web series, I kind of met, all these young creatives in the New York scene. So it was really ultimately just like kind of like one nexus point for me. And it was mostly High Maintenance. Because I was also, where I was in my life at that time, I was married. When I moved to New York, I was married, had just had my second kid. So it wasn't like hanging out in the social scene so much, more of a suburbs guy.
Right.
But yeah, I would say it was kind of like my entry into the creative community in New York was through High Maintenance, and met a lot of people who were just coming out of like new NYU grad school, film school there, and meeting other DPs and other, filmmakers of that age who were getting into, wanting to do stuff. So they kind of would help with High Maintenance. And it just kind of blossomed from there.
It is, the website I write for, ProVideo Coalition, that puts this podcast out, kind of has me in two worlds with most things that I do online, which is like half educational. Well, I should say half educational, half trying to be educated. Because every once in a while, someone comes out, someone who's a newbie or whatever, comes up with a sick idea or like workflow, and you're like, all right, cool. But entertaining and educational. And I find that one thing that's frustrating is people will always have this like, well, how do I get there? And I'm always just like, I don't know, go to festivals and start working on just anything. And that answer always seems, I guess, frustrating. But that's the truth. Like, even if you think, I saw a Reddit thread the other day that was like, oh, festivals are all bullshit and we need a revolution there. And I'm like, okay, maybe, but getting into a festival almost isn't as important as going to the festival and meeting the other people who are making stuff.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so my festival experience was So I went to South by Southwest in 2005 with a documentary that I shot called Self-Made Man. It was for the PBS program POV. And it was like Austin in 2005 was very different than Austin now. And it was small and it was like very filmmaker friendly. And then a couple years later in 2007, went back to South by Southwest with a film that I made with Matt Ogans and Jamie Patrikoff called Confessions of a Superhero, a documentary about characters that dress up as superhero characters in front of the Mann's Chinese Theater in Hollywood. Sure. Pictures. Yeah. It's a great film.
If I do say so myself.
No, it really
if I haven't seen it, I definitely know of it.
I gotta be honest, it was like it was peak, like it was right in the entrance of like documentaries kind of hitting big. You know, it was the same year that the King of Kong you remember that one, King of Kong, the guy that played Donkey Kong. I think it was Seth Gordon, the director. He made that movie. There was a lot. It was a good time. It was like also technology wise, there was like mini DV was like now shooting 24p. The HBX 200, the P2 was just coming out. So the like people.
Oh, I hated those P2 cards. They're so frustrating.
I know, but you can shoot 720. You know. So anyway, that we made that film then. So the festival, South by Southwest, it was still very filmmaker friendly. And that's all it was. And of course there was music as well. And then I went back in 2018 for a movie I did called Most Likely to Murder, which was like a Lionsgate film. And I was like, yeah, South by, I haven't been here forever. And I got there and I was like, holy shit. I was like, I'm like, where are the filmmakers? You know, it was like, and no shade here, but it was like all podcasters and all tech. And I was like, I literally I was like, where's the filmmaker lounge? I'm like, I want to, you know, is there, where can I hang out? And it was really difficult to meet other filmmakers. That being said, and I, you know, not to jump on the Reddit thread of saying festivals are shit, but like, I was disappointed because I was like, oh man, you know, like this once, you know, very like cool filmmaker friendly festival seemed to have turned less filmmaker friendly. But you know, I know it's still filmmaker friendly and it's still a great place. But
well, that actually highlights kind of I guess where I was heading, which was the bigger festivals aren't necessary, especially it's anything, you know, when it gets too big now it becomes more commercialized and it's less for the people doing it. But to not in my brain, I didn't respond to this thread, but in my head I was like, who cares if you didn't get into whatever South by? Like there's a bunch of smaller, whatever, the Santa Barbara Film Festival. My buddy put his documentary there, yada yada yada, nominated for an Emmy. Yeah, you know, like it's, you can get, you know, the smaller ones, or even to the point of like web series. I remember when web series especially were first starting to come out. By 2012, I feel like they were kind of catching steam, but people were like, excuse you? Like, we're gonna, and actually, didn't the writer's strike kind of like really spur on web series? Like we had Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog and shit like that ended up.
I would say, I mean, maybe I you know, I'm not an authority on that. Yeah, exactly. I mean, but it was 2008, and you know, what I know that happened then was that there was definitely like a blossoming of reality shows, which I worked on as well. As a young DP, I got my chance to shoot a reality show, and I was like, yeah, great. Going back to your thought of like, just do, you know, how do I get there? How do I do this? You know, like do stuff. And, you know, I'm 50 years old. So I started in 1994 in Los Angeles, and my last semester senior year, I went to Ithaca College. I did like an internship program in LA, and I stayed, and I was like, you know, the company I was interning for was a commercial production company. And, you know, I kind of was like, I knew I wanted to do stuff, make movies, but I wasn't like laser focused. It was more like, I want to be in this industry. So I found myself like just being like, oh, cool, a music video, I'll work on that. Oh, you need someone to go do a light study for this commercial? Sure, I'll do that. And like PAing and camera PA, grip PA, electric PA, any type of PA in commercials. Cause this was also like in the 90s where commercials were,
Huge.
$3 or $4 million, there'd be like a $5 million Coca-Cola commercial. It was like, that was common,
Fincher was
so
commercials.
yeah. And it was exactly. And you could be on a 10-day commercial shoot, you know what I mean? Like you'd be on a car commercial for a month or something, and then, after PAing, I was like, oh, that's cool. Gripping is neat. Let me try that. Electric is neat. Let me try that. So my path was not, I didn't go to like film school and then grad school and come out a DP and be like, I just want to DP. I kind of was like, I didn't know I wanted to DP right away. I thought I wanted to direct. I wanted to direct like everyone else,
Yeah.
So I came out but then I started realizing, I was like, oh man, I'm really much more of like I enjoy directing and I enjoy the aspects that go into that, but I enjoy the technical side of this craft. I like being a craftsman, and that's when I started seeing, I started like gravitating more towards, camera work and stuff like that. I don't know. Am I just rambling? What is?
No, I told you at the beginning, rambling is perfectly acceptable. That's fine.
I guess. Okay.
But that it's heartening to hear that though, because that's basically what I did. Is I went to film. I went to ASU, but I went to the film school there at the time. It had just started like 2 years prior, and just knew that I wanted to be in the film. I was in theater before that, so like the filmmaking community, as it were. And I think I graduated not even knowing. Long story short, I ended up working for Red Bull, and I thought I was going to do that for the rest of my life because it was super cool. And then they were like, "Yeah, we don't need you anymore." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I was a photographer too, so I had I left college with like no reel. My senior project was good, but not something you would show anyone. Shut on the.
I think I was similar vibe for me too. I think, I when I got out or when I was going for my internship, they were like, "Oh, here's this commercial production company." I was like, "Commercials?" I was like, "I don't want to do commercials." And like the guy who was running the program, this guy Steve Tropiano, he's like, basically they shoot on film. It's like little movies, And I was like, okay. And then I remember like very first week of interning, they were like, "Oh, take these tapes." And this is back when things were on like 3/4 inch U-matic tapes. They're like, "Take these casting tapes to the director." Errol Morris was the director.
Casual.
and I was like, Errol Morris. I'm like, okay. I'm like, I did like a whole semester studying like the Thin Blue Line, like this documentary research class. And now, and I'm like, he's doing a commercial. And I just was like, that's bullshit, and the head of production at Chelsea Pictures, she was like, yeah, she's like, where do you think people make their money?
Right.
She was like, everybody, she's like, a lot of people do commercials. And I was like, it was like a quick reality check for me. I was like, oh yeah, art is one thing and commerce is another. And, and going out and making money is doing your craft is what you have to kind of do. So, that was a quick lesson.
Well, I think to your point about like, I'm in the camp that like film school is not necessary, but it certainly is incredibly helpful for multiple reasons. But I think one thing where film schools kind of tend to fail is I don't think they hammer that down very well. And because they're showing you Godfather, they're showing you Citizen Kane, they're showing you fucking Birth of a Nation. All these like huge films, and they set this kind of expectation in you that you're going to go off and make Empire Strikes Back or whatever and make all your it's going to be really fun. It's going to be, you're going to make $1 billion and everyone's going to love you.
I know. I think one thing that kind of like irked me when I first got out of school is that like I think college kind of set me up to be, I don't want to sound like shit, like I don't know, just like not, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good word, like set me up to be an artist, but
Right.
that sounds really lame. But it's like they kind of like set me up to be a filmmaker, and think that way, which I think was good. But then when I got to the real world, I was like, oh, I don't have any real world training. And that was something that kind of bummed me out. Like Avids, like digital nonlinear editing. They never talked about that. I mean, it was granted right on the cusp of like the mid 90s. There was a lot of like, we weren't taught that in the early 90s in college. It was like linear editing. You cut on a Steenbeck,
Right.
and if you did video editing, it was like inline cutting or online cutting. So there were a lot I just was like, oh, it's a lot of business. It's a lot of, there's so many other like technical aspects that they didn't really teach me at school, but they taught me that, I guess like the heart of it, which I think was good. And it made me want to make Empire Strikes Back.
Well, slightly on that note, one thing that, because I left college not really knowing, like I didn't actually want to be a director like most people. I kind of just wanted, so I guess I figured something would pop up that I would be like, I'm adept at that.
Yeah.
And so it became cinematography. But I have some friends that work at Legacy Effects now, speaking of Star Wars. And I've said this a few times. Maybe it's just that I'm fascinated by it, but I do remember making props as a kid and being very fascinated by that. And I think there was no class that was like, this is prop making. So there was no shot that I was even going to comprehend how to get in there. But I've mentioned it a few times on this podcast. It was like, if I had found a way to get into that, I mean, my friends are exhausted, but they got to make Grogu and shit. So
yeah, that's amazing. I watch like on Disney Plus, like all the ILM, documentaries about like how they'd start. And I'm like, and as a kid, I made models, I was always like little painting and crafting models and stuff. And when I got home, when I got out of college, I remember being in my house with some friends. I was in Santa Monica, and I was like, I want to be a model maker. Again, like I don't think I knew what I wanted to be when I got out of school, and it wasn't until later, like I said earlier, when I was really seeing the cinematographer on commercials specifically. And specifically, I remember it was one guy, Boyan Bazeli, who said to me, he was like, yeah, he's like, this is great. He's like, I fly in or whatever. I come in, I go out to dinner with the agency. I shoot their thing. And then I go to the little wrap dinner, and then I say goodbye.
Yeah.
And he's like, and I have all, and I was like, oh yeah, that is pretty cool. He also gave me some good advice about my reel. I was working on my reel, and he was like, I was like, oh, what if somebody wants me to shoot this thing, but I haven't done it yet? And he's like, oh, just tell him you took it off your reel. Yeah. He's like, tell him it was on your old reel, and you don't have any more reels, and all you have is the new reel. But it's on the old reel. I was like, oh yeah, because back in the day, there was a time where like, if you didn't have it on tape, it just really didn't exist. But yeah, I think, and then I found cinematography, I think later in my career, because I always loved photography. Like when I first moved to LA out of college, some of the first jobs I got were photo assistants, and I really enjoyed being able to like do the lighting, do the art, do the styling. It was like me, a photographer, a stylist, and a subject or whatever, And I thought I kind of liked that hands-on, scrappy kind of endeavor. And I think that's where
the same way.
Yeah, when I started I was working in commercials and working as a grip, an electric, locations, just doing whatever I could to make money. And I remember being on some healthcare ad and being like, two people, we built this thing on stage and we did like 2 days of pre-lighting, and it was like just a 2-shot, it was like so big and so massive. And I was like, gosh, if I was doing this with a still photographer, we'd have like a couple lights here, a couple lights there, and it would look pretty good. So I kind of tracked out of that and was like, I want to go just more in the still photography side, because I felt like I was learning how to make things big, but with not a lot of people, not a lot of money. And now, and then that kind of like led me to documentary work, because documentary work, there was never a lot of money in it. But so a lot of doc filmmakers they would take a chance on some young dude who had like a pretty decent like still portfolio, and they'd be like, okay, well, you can shoot this, right? And then I also HD. I remember when like HD was coming out, and this is before mini DV. It was like, I forget that, like the F900 or whatever. There was some like HD camera, and I remember getting like some calls from people who were like, "Hey, can you shoot HD?" And it was like, "Yeah, I can shoot HD." They're like, "Okay, we're looking for an HD DP." I'm like, "Yeah, that's me. I can do that."
Oh my God. I've talked about like the camera technology changing for like, maybe younger listeners who don't understand how good they have it, because I'm an old man screaming at clouds. But I forgot that I had seen so many resumes, sorry to interrupt you, where it said HD DP. Like people had to advertise that they were an HD cinematographer, because you wouldn't say I'm a 4K cinematographer. Now people are like, yeah, duh.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think this was the year probably like, you're looking at like 2000, 2001, around there. And I specifically, like, I remember going, I forget the name of the camera house, was in LA, but I got to go in and like play with the Varicam, and like learn it. And like, and then I could be like, oh, I can shoot Varicam. And that literally like opened doors, because people were like, do you know how to use the Varicam? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, great. So there was this kind of like point in the timeline where I could, I learned some new technology and it helped me. I don't know how that relates to now, but.
Well, I was just thinking about that, because as you were saying it, because you would never put, like I said, you'd never put like 4K DP, but also by saying HD DP, people were making a leap. Not because it wasn't that you knew how to shoot in a high definition, it was you knew the equipment.
Yeah.
So I guess these days people would be like, have you shot on whatever Alexa, or probably more apt, have you shot this specific red body that came out 2 months ago? You're
right. Right.
Yeah.
And that's when you just say, yeah, it's but I just took it off my reel. So.
Yeah. That's actually I've asked a bunch of DPs this, but how important is a reel these days, do you think, to the average DP?
I think it's crucial. It's vital. I mean, if you,
I've heard a lot of no's.
Well, so you're okay. Maybe I'm misusing the term reel. Like a reel, you mean like a 2-minute montage?
Yeah.
Okay.
On Vimeo or YouTube or whatever.
I think that it's crucial for people who don't have a larger body of work that they can lean on and say, here's my repertoire of stuff.
Something to fill a website portfolio.
Yeah. So because I think, when I was starting out, I did that. I made like a 2.5-minute super cut of things that looked great, and my friend was a trailer editor, and he like cut it.
That's a good friend.
He did this. I mean, I cut it, and then he was like, let me take a pass at this. And then I was like, oh, damn. So it was great. So, I think it's important for young, or you're not young, but like, DPs who are entering into this to show like, hey, I can get some cool shots, as opposed to like, yeah, I did this show or I did this movie, Right. If you have like a variety of short films where people probably aren't going to have access to those entire pieces, it maybe isn't a bad idea. I personally, I look at it now. If I see someone has a reel, I don't look at it. Because I'm like, oh, they got a reel. I'm like, what's the point? But so I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's good for some and maybe not useful for others.
The general consensus seems to be basically what you're saying is like, it's important to have a portfolio of some kind, but reels are only, and I've noticed this in my own life. Like when I first started, the reel was all I had, because all I had was a selection of pretty pictures, basically, in motion. and then as I've gotten further along, it becomes more word of mouth, honestly. But people going off the back of the last project you shot, and then every once in a while, like I just got a gig where basically I was recommended, but the guy just wanted to double check that the look that I was inherently putting out was what he thought it was, which it was. So I got the job. But my reel, if we're just to go off of views, like I think it's got like 1,000 views on YouTube, and it's been up for a year and a half, and I know it's like subscribers on the channel, where like this podcast goes out. So they're probably like, let's see if this guy talking knows what the fuck
I mean, I was going to say something that was, I was like, oh, and then I just,
my bad.
No, it's not your fault. It's my, stupid brain.
I jumped.
I was going to say something about reels that I thought was helpful, but, I don't know. Oh,
Portfolio.
What it was. Here's, something that I think is helpful for DPs is when making a reel, if you can string together a sequence of shots from a scene, as opposed to like a wide shot, a crash, a boom, like a full montage of like non sequitur stuff.
Right.
It's helpful to kind of show directors and showrunners or producers or whatever that you can craft a sequence, because I think that is so vital. I would say that 100% of my job now is, it's so much more like attuned to like, how do we get all this in an hour and a half, or how do we convey this emotion or tone in our schedule? So it's, I think, helpful to show people that you can tell a story with the juxtaposition of camera placement and shots.
Right.
And I think that's, sometimes reels don't do that. And I think they should.
Well, and not to mention, like, if the whole point of a reel is to sell someone on the idea that you know what you're doing, you could show that you can take pretty pictures with a Instagram feed,
Right.
Not, what does the reel add to your still photography, essentially?
That's a good point. Yeah.
I did want to ask about the SNL thing, because I've never actually interviewed anyone who worked there.
Okay.
What was working on because I assume you did the shorts?
Yes, digital film, the film unit. Yeah.
Yeah. What was that kind of workflow like? Because I know it's super accelerated for the live show. Was it the same for the shorts?
For sure. Yeah.
What was that experience like? What'd you learn?
Okay, so the experience there, so basically what I did season 42 and season 43. And so basically what would happen is that on Wednesday, like Monday night, they do a read through of the show and like work out, pick some sketches and pick what they're going to go, rehearse all week. Wednesday night, they do a read through of the film unit scripts. When I was there, I still think there were 3 film units when I was there. I was on the Beast unit. Blake McClure was on the film unit, and Jason Vandermeer was on Good Neighbor. Well, those are the 3 DPs that were there. So what they would do is that Wednesday night they would read the scripts, and then they would basically assign a script to each unit.
And those are just the code names for the units.
Yeah,
Beast,
those
Neighbor, and
film unit. And yeah, so now I think there's Beast unit, film unit, and Magic unit. Good Neighbor was based on the sketch group of Beck Bennett, Dave McCrary, and Kyle Mooney. So
Kyle Mooney's great.
Yeah. Yeah, they had a thing called Good Neighbor. So when they came in, they were like, we're going to make our sketches. So those Good Neighbor had they were very much contained to those ideas.
The lonely island of it all.
Yeah. So Wednesday night you get the script. Basically the director of my unit was Paul Briganti, And so Paul and I would talk Wednesday night. We'd go get the script, and then we would just throw some ideas back and forth. Paul would basically really quickly be like, it's okay, this script is a send up of this music video. I want to do for this script, it's going to be, let's shoot it like this, or let's try and make it filmic, or this one's going to be a parody of that, so Wednesday night would be like just some quick research on stuff. We shot with Alexa Minis, and we had like Cook S4s on hold like every week, yeah. But
that's the look, man.
we would I use S4s all the time. But for the film unit, we worked with Able Cine. They would try and get us whatever we could for the look, and so essentially we would switch out lenses. So like there are times where I use some Hawk anamorphics, I use some Cook anamorphics. There were times we found some like old Cook, I forget the name of it, but like old Cook zooms, like classic Cook zooms. Sometimes we do, we try to, use lenses that would speak to the piece a little bit. So then Thursday morning, we'd all meet at 30 Rock. We'd go out and location scout, because it was always on location. And by Thursday afternoon, we'd go back to 30 Rock, and then what would we do? We'd hang out and talk, and like we just had this bullpen where it was like the production designer, the gaffer, the grip, the AD, production, everybody would just kind of like be like, okay, this is what we're gonna do. And then Friday morning we would shoot, and then sometimes those were very, very long days, and other times they weren't. But we were basically, we would be spread. What would happen is like we would film something for our unit, like with the host from like 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. And then the host would have to go to the other film unit and film there. And then that host would have to go back to Rock Center and like rehearse for the live show. So there was a lot of, it was a scheduling nightmare, in that nothing in the real world of production operates this way. And like you would shoot, you'd shoot like Kate McKinnon, and then like have a body double for like 80 Bryant's shoulder, but we don't get 80, and it's like 9 a.m., but you don't get 80 until 5 p.m. So so then you go off and you shoot other things, and then you come back and you shoot the reverse of 80 10 hours later into completely different lighting situations, but you have to manipulate it. So that's unreal, it's fun, and it's like a challenge beyond belief. What we did have is that we always had enough crew, and we always had enough money. We never had enough time. And so that was difficult. And, would put a strain on us a little bit. But, then we'd go back. Then Friday, we'd film all day into the wee hours or whatever. And then Friday night, we never downloaded anything on set either. We would just take the cards and just run them back to editorial. Yeah. And they would just start cutting with whatever they had. So they would just be cutting overnight. And then Saturday, I would go to the mill, which was the color house, like the color correction post house.
Yeah.
And we would basically they would send like an assembly cut of like what they think they're going to use. And we would just color all the footage that we could and set looks. And then basically, that was it for me. Once the looks were set and we all felt comfortable with it, I would take off, and then the colorist would stay until the show went on air, or stay until that bit that segment aired, because they would be cutting that segment up until like literally in airtime. And there were times where they'd be like, "Hey, we're gonna switch this shot," and it would be 11:25, and so like the colorist would have to like redo it or something, or like send in a new version of the color. So yeah, it was crazy, but unique, and what was great from my standpoint, from a cinematography standpoint, was that it was like, every week you did something, you potentially could be doing something completely different and new than what you did last week. You might be doing like a rap music video, and then next week you're doing like a meet cute rom-com, and then the week after that you're doing like a sci-fi, or something, and so that was cool. And I will say that, like, I never really got much. I mean, I got a little bit of pushback. Like, I'd be like, "Hey, we need 2 sets of anamorphics," and the producers was like,
No, you don't.
Well, no, they'd be like, "Really?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, we really do." And they're like, "Okay."
Oh, damn.
I like, so like it was cool. And I'd be like, "We need this 50-foot telescoping crane for this one shot we're gonna get, that we have to get."
Right.
And so they're like, so like that was pretty awesome, because in my other work, the pushback is much greater.
Yeah. No, I'm on the greater pushback side of things, where it's like, well, the big thing is like, because I have a C500 Mark II, so it's full frame.
Yeah.
And you'll get people going like, "Oh, we want to shoot full frame and we want to shoot anamorphic because we want this interview to look really cool." And you're like, "All right, yeah. So it's going to cost, this much to get full frame anamorphics." And they're always like, "Ooh, can you cut us a deal on that?" I'm like, "You talk to the rental. You think I own these?"
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Full frame is great. I did a show called Tell Me Lies on Hulu, which came out in the fall. We shot it last spring. We shot the DXL2 8K.
Yeah.
And with Pana speeds, and it was great to work in like that full frame. That was my kind of first full frame kind of foray. It was nice.
You can put full frame DP on your on your website.
Exactly, full frame DP. And the other DP, the DP that shot the pilot and then was on for the other half of the season, Luc Montpellier, he was super into that. I mean, he set the look because he shot the pilot. And that was, he was like, yeah, he's like full frame, you get these, you can do these like wide angle close-ups, but things like really fall off and stuff. And so I love, and that show was a lot about putting the camera right in people's faces to be in their head.
There's definitely, like, I've pushed back a lot on people saying like, "Ooh, I love the full frame look," because I'm kind of on the Steve Yedlin side of things of like, well, there's no look inherent in full frame, but there is a workflow, like the wide close up, that still looks like you're on a 50.
Yeah.
On Super 35. You can do that technically with the amount of room you tend to be given, but in a giant stage, you can make anything kind of look like anything. But it's definitely like the look in terms of, obviously with a bigger sensor, inherent in a bigger sensor, you're gonna have more physical resolution, more pixels, like the smooth, the tones and the smoothness of the fall off and the gradation is always a lot nicer.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I will say that for television, I mean, I don't know, I'm not like a super technical DP. I came
to this nerd first, trust me.
Okay. I'm not nerd. I'm more
well, you went to Ithaca, so you got the cool, you got the
I learned how to do keg stands, and I learned all the important things.
ASU, drinking 101, the importance of the Pacer beer,
Yeah. I do a lot of TV, so I find that like I don't know if you really can tell with this stuff so much with TV. I mean, it's amazing what you can do, but I do feel like if you're shooting specifically for the cinema and for projection and for the theater, a lot of, choice in sensor and choice in lenses and stuff, it really has like, there's like a next level to that stuff. Whereas I think with television, some of it gets a little lost in translation. I mean, because not everyone is sitting at home watching on like a 65-inch TV in a dark room,
I did want to, just speaking of television and banking off of the SNL thing and the kind of like different looks and stuff. Last night I watched the email they sent me. They were like, all right, it's the other two, season 4 or episode 4 has this really cool Pleasantville. Yeah, I know the movie. And I was like, ooh, I want to watch that. And for people listening, at the time of this recording, it is not out, and I was not given a screener.
Okay.
So I watched the first 3 episodes. Okay. But in the brief, they were like, there's a different look for everything. Did you kind of pull that SNL knowledge of like, immediate looks and quick movement to do that show?
Absolutely. I mean, Chris Kelly and Sarah Schneider, the creators of the other two, were the head writers on season 42, the head writers of SNL on season 42 when I was there. So that's where I met them.
Connection.
Yeah. Exactly. And so they, I worked with them on a handful of, film unit sketches that we did. And they bring that vibe to this show. And I think that especially like in the other two, season 1 was kind of about this young boy, being like thrown into like stardom immediately, and his older brother and sister kind of, them being like pulled along by the gravity of it. Season 2, it was just character driven, but it didn't seem like there was a lot of big set pieces. I mean, there were certainly some, but season 3 of the other two this year, there's some very big creative swings, and like each episode has like uniquely distinct set pieces that can really like make it stand alone, so yes, episode 4 is basically Carrie, one of the main characters in the show. He gets cast in a TV show called Emily Overruled, which is like a courtroom drama, and it's in the 18th season, and they just do the same thing day in and day out, So we made it like, or Pleasantville, Chris and Sarah crafted it so that it would be like a Pleasantville experience. So when he walks onto set, he color drains, and all of a sudden he's in this black and white world. And he wants to change things up by like standing off his mark and doing, like acting and showing these other actors that like, look, you can, be alive and be different. And that's how like, the color bursts into scene. So yeah, I mean, that was like absolutely an episode where we very much like went for a specific look. There's other, like there's like a Brokeback Mountain send up, in later on in the season, I think in episode 2 we did some like rom-com vibe where they go like, it's like Booksmart, there's like this, they go in the pool and there's like swimming, so we tried to kind of like evoke kind of some of those images that might resonate with some of the viewers from other projects in pop culture. And I definitely think that in this season 3, you'll see a lot of that. Which is
so I had not seen the show. My girlfriend had heard of it, but I have been ferociously busy, so I haven't been.
But you haven't seen it?
No, I watched the first 3 episodes.
Interview's over.
Yeah, bye. So I watched the first 3 episodes, and at first I was like, oh, okay, I get it, cute show. And then like the more absurd it started to get, the more I like really dialed in and went, okay, I'm here for like a fun ride. And yeah, all 3 episodes were like, I really like the one where she can't be seen at the party.
Yeah.
That shit just had me rolling, because it's so like, I when I say dumb, I mean in like the most loving way possible. Like it's silly, absurd, amazing dumbness.
Dumb was a term that Chris and Sarah would use. So like, if this is dumb, they're like, they would watch a take and they'd be like, they're like, oh my God, this is so dumb. that means it was perfect and we can move on, you know?
Yeah.
So like, yeah, for sure. We basically, I mean, that show has like, especially this season, there's a lot of like emotion and a lot of heart, and but like coupling that with a lot of like absurdity and fast-paced comedy and lots like jokes, a joke every minute,
Yeah.
so I think the absurdity like goes to a next level in this season. You'll see if you keep watching.
I definitely will be. I wanted to ask, like, specifically the one that comes to mind is with that, really with all three of those episodes, but because you did 1 through 4 and 8 through 12.
Yes, 1 through 4, 8 through 12. I directed 6 and 7, and I had COVID for 5. So yeah.
Congrats. Well, you got to direct though, but I wanted to kind of ask, because one thing that I think some people who maybe are starting out or maybe just interested in film and aren't necessarily filmmakers don't understand is, it would seem on the outside that shooting a drama, shooting 7 would be more difficult to light, but it's usually not, because you only need one big source and you're done. Whereas comedy is like 100,000 lights. So for instance, one thing I was very jealous of is you've got this scene in the party where she can't be seen, where you've got all the characters in a bathroom, and I fucking despise bathroom scenes because they're impossible to light, and there's a mirror, so you're really constricted on angles. How did you like that?
Well, here's what I'm going to say. I did not shoot that scene. I was
for heaven's sake.
Here's what Zach Schamberg shot that scene. So unfortunately I can't give you
the secrets.
Give you the secrets on that one, but that scene kept getting punted to the end of the schedule, and then I had to leave. So Zach shot that. Zach DP'd episode 5 and episode 6. So I think though, because we had tech scouted it and everything, but I think what we were planning on doing was we rigged, we put up,
extendy poles.
Yeah, I was. Why am I blanking on
Matthews makes them, I think, right?
Yeah. Oh my God, I'm
spreaders.
Spreaders. Yeah, we put up spreaders. That was the plan. Put up spreaders and then have like, a variety of like backlight and front light, and some side light, and then so basically just like rimming the room. And what you could do is then Matt Mendelson, who was our gaffer, would work with Christian. I can't remember his last name. Christian was our dimming board op, but they would, we would have everything kind of pre-lit, front light here, backlight here, front light here, backlight here. And then kind of just like, once we'd frame up, dial stuff in. So I'm assuming that's what they did for that scene. Cause that's basically that was the workflow on a lot of stuff. And especially with the mirror there, I know when we were tech scouting, we definitely wanted to use spreaders and kind of work off a grid because of reflections. Now, there was some VFX planned in that scene. So,
right.
We were kind of like in the tech scout, we were kind of like, all right, well, if we have to paint something out, we can. That's something that people do quite often, but it seems like the jobs I'm on, that never happens. But like people will shoot like
stands and stuff.
Yeah, people will, or they'll paint out like I know. I heard from some people that worked on Hacks, there was like this great big wide shot of a room and then a close up, and I was like, oh wow! I'm like, I talked to them. I was like, so you had to shoot this master? Like, no, we shot the wide and the close up at the same time. We just painted out the camera and the operator.
So
I've
actually heard that, and I've tried to. The problem. So I'm kind of going back to what you were saying about like doing everything. I got a lot of skills. So, coloring, editing, whatever. And I can't remember what it was, but someone had mentioned that David Fincher, who I bring up far too often on this podcast, would do that. Like boom poles, light stands. Like if it did, he's like, we're just painting it out because he's going to touch every inch of every frame anyway. And so I've been doing that specifically with boom poles when they dip in or whatever, but lights but I've heard a couple people do that camera move where they're like, we're just gonna shoot the wide and then bring the camera in, set it down, and send it, and a little plate that we can
I mean, and here's where, and another thing which happens a lot, but haven't really been able to do too much of it, but is if you're going to do a dolly move and you're doing a slow push in, but you want to be on a wider lens, you'll see the track. So a lot of times that stuff gets painted out, and because you'll see like a move that's like, laser still, and it's just pushing forward, and you're like, man, that's a pretty wide lens. And that's a 20-foot move.
Right.
Why am I not seeing the track? It's because it gets painted out. We would paint. The only thing we really painted out in this season was the boom pole. We would do this. We probably did this, a few times a week. Is that we would want to shoot like a wide, and I'd have the opportunity to get like second camera could shoot like over the shoulder on a long lens close up, but then the sound department would be like, what the fuck, we can't we can't boom this. So we would set it up so that we could paint out the boom, or we'd get a plate so that they could use it. That technology and that that workflow is not insane,
No, and especially if you get a clean plate. For people listening who want to try it, just get a clean plate. You don't have to send it to VFX. Just get a shot of whatever. Obviously, you're probably going to want to be locked off. But yeah, you can just cut, paste, you're done. It's there.
Yeah. I mean, we had a VFX supervisor who was in LA, and he was very present. I forget his name. I'm terrible with names.
Me too. Sorry.
He would be, ever present on, FaceTimes and text, and he would watch over Q-Take, which is, we would transmit the basically the footage on Q-Take.
I was expecting frame.
Yeah. And so we would do that. And he would, he'd be like, hey, make sure you get a plate of this. Sometimes he might be a little bit late and we're like, shit, sorry, man, we already moved on. But
content to wear, Phil, have fun.
Yeah, exactly. So, but it was helpful to have, because it's very easy on set for people to be like, oh, we can paint it out, and here's something that annoys me a little bit in the world now. It seems like DPs are asked, oh, can this be painted out, or can that do this, or can we comp that in? And I'm kind of like, my answer is always like, I'm not
ask the VFX supervisor.
But then my next answer tacking onto that is, I'm like, you can do anything.
Right.
Okay. You can do anything. I don't have the purse or the time, I'm not in control of schedule or money, but I know that you can do anything because I've seen the results of it, and what is dangerous is that everybody now working in film or television or what has seen some behind the scenes thing, or has watched a movie, or has watched something where they're like, yeah, we just rotoscoped it out and we built a city back there and blah, 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 and you're like, oh, that's amazing. I want to do that. You're like, but do you have the time and money to do that? Right. So, I would say whenever something was asked of me, like, can we paint this out? My very first thing is I would get the line producer, and I'm like, can we paint this out? And I'm like, I need a verbal, yes or no from you. Because, you don't want to get blamed for stuff. Oh, well, the DP said that we can paint it out, I don't know.
Well, it's also like, are you asking if I can? Because I probably could. I don't know if it'll look good.
Yeah, right.
I could certainly take a crack at it. Or do you mean we?
Yeah, right. So, I mean, all I know is that anything can get done. Absolutely anything. Whether you have the time and money for it, is another thing.
Yeah. What's the triangle? Good, fast, cheap.
Yeah. Good, fast, choose two. Yeah. I mean, it is the absolute truth of filmmaking.
Yeah.
Good, fast, or cheap. You get to choose two.
Yeah.
Not all three. For sure.
Well, I want to be respectful of your time because we just hit the hour mark, and it is. Well, I guess is it Friday? It is Friday, so I guess maybe a little lax. But I do end the podcast with the same two questions for everyone.
Okay.
And apparently they're thinkers, so don't feel bad if there's a long pause here.
Okay.
I will cut the pause out. First one, better for films than television, but if you were to schedule a double feature with the other two and another film or television program, what would it be?
Okay. So you're saying like, okay, if I were to take the other two, and then what would be the other show that you would watch? Now, does it have to be like, do I have to pick the episode of the other two?
It's your double feature. So I'm thinking more of the show in general, because like I said, it's easier with a film than a television show. But like the show in general, and then either a complement or a contrast or whatever in your head would be an interesting view.
Okay. Long pause here.
Yeah.
Fire up the editing machine. It's a really interesting question because the contrast, like I'm wondering if you should be drawn to like a contrast for that, or is it something that you want to just stay in that mindset? That's a tough call. I would, I don't know. I would just say like right now, my answer would be, and I know, what's going to suck is that later this afternoon, I'm going to regret what I say. And I'm going to be like, no, it should have been this. No, it should have been that.
Just email it to me and I'll do a voice at the end.
God, this is like that game when people say like, what are your top 5 movies? What are your top 3 movies? And I'm like, man, they switch all the time. But what I'm going to say is I would say the other two double feature a show called Somebody Somewhere on HBO.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the other two is also on HBO. So that's an easy, easy.
So there you go. You save one platform to rule them all. So that's what I would say. Yeah. It's kind of different tone, but also a half hour comedy, but a different take on comedy.
Hell yeah.
So
second question. A lot of podcast people go, what's the best piece of advice you ever got? And I think that's a silly question. I want to know what the worst piece of advice you ever got was.
Oh, shit. Okay. The worst
Longer
piece.
pause.
Yeah. Because the reason I can't call that up as quickly is because you try not to harbor and think about negative things.
Sure. Yeah.
You try and remember the positive things that propel you and lift you up. But,
well, if there is a best, the only reason I ask, I mean, unless you have it, but the only reason I ask that is because it happened on one podcast where a guy, he goes, I don't know what the best advice was, but I can tell you what the worst advice was. And I was like, that's a great question.
Yeah.
It's different. This is all inside baseball for this podcast now.
Yeah.
But I feel like a lot of the best advice tends to be, the cream always rises to the top. So you get a lot of like, oh, stick with it, or, always own your draft. And it's kind of the same answer. Whereas worst, everyone's gotten terrible advice somewhere. But it could be unique to you.
Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to think about it. You may have to edit this pause, but I am going to recall some of the worst advice. And I'm trying to remember what that would be. Does it have to be career related, or can it just be bad advice?
Yeah. No, it's like the double feature. It's your floor.
Oh man. This is a hard question. I think
next season I might drop it. It makes people stressed out.
I don't know, because I don't know if I have a specific, like, I don't know if I have a specific thing where I was like, yeah, I'm going to listen to that. And then, okay, here's some advice I got. It has nothing to do with my career, but maybe it has something to do with me, which is something, I guess.
Well,
So
you're here for a reason. So
I wanted to buy a car many, many years ago. And I was like, I want to buy an old classic car. And my dad was like, why? Why not get a new car that works well? Why would you want like an old car? And I was like, because they're cool, man. You know, they're cool. And my dad was like, don't do it. And I was like, okay. He's like, but he's like, you're an adult. You can do what you want. So, so I was talking to a friend and he was like, well, how much money do you want to spend? I was like, oh, $5,000. And he's like, well, just give it to me. I'm a mechanic. I'll buy the car and I'll fix it up and give it to you. And I was like, okay. So I did that. And he gave me a car that never ran. And it took me years and probably another $15,000 to get it running. And then I moved out of LA and I didn't bring the car with me. It was a 1966 El Camino. It was a really cool looking car.
That's a cool car.
And I got it running. And finally, for like 3 months, I was like baller, you know. And then I moved and I didn't take it with me. So that was like, so the advice that the guy gave me about let me get the car for you was really I got conned a little bit.
Yeah.
Oh, here's another bad advice thing. I just moved to LA and I was like, does it rain here? And someone says, no, it never rains. Cause I was like, I'm going to cut a hole in the roof of my car, which was a 1984 Chevy station wagon, Caprice Estate. And I was like, I'm going to cut a hole in the roof of my car, make a sunroof. And this guy was like, it never rains, dude. It'll be fine. And that year was like El Nino. And it was like the worst. It was like the really terrible rain. And I just got soaked. So that was some bad advice there. But that's all I can remember.
That's fine. I mean, I remember I've always, my whole life, and it was because of Gone in 60 Seconds, but I don't care.
Yeah.
I've always wanted a Restomod 67 fastback Mustang. Restomod being the operative word because I'm sure there's a bunch of running ones, but all the ones that I found come from Hawaii. So the underside is just corroded.
Oh, yeah. Because there's salt there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so it's less a problem in LA, but in Hawaii for sure. And every 67 fastback I've found has been too expensive, and they never show you a photo of the undercarriage, and you're always like,
yeah. When I went to sell my car, my 66 El Camino, the guy, it had a moonroof in it. And it didn't have the original. It was really a beater. It looked like crap. It looked like shit. But under the hood, it was nice. It was like all, tricked out and was fast and strong. But no one would buy it because everyone was like, oh, the body is just beat to shit and it's been modified and can't ever go back. And so I basically gave it to somebody for like $200. I literally was like, I'm moving tomorrow. And this guy was like, oh, I'll take it. And I just sold it to him for like a few $100. And then he never changed the registration or never changed anything. And a few years later, I got a call from like the Santa Monica Police Department. They're like, yeah, we've impounded your car. It's been in the lot for, 6 months and blah, blah, blah. You owe this much money. And I was like, what the fuck? I was like, so I had to like take care of that. And that sucked. But,
yeah, you can't tell the cops like, oh, no, I sold that. And they're like, what proof? And you're like, the handshake I did. Yeah,
no, and you know what? Like I gave the dude the title and then he never did anything. I did it all wrong. And I got screwed for it. But I mean, anyway.
Well, I guess the bad advice is everyone is trustworthy and has your best interest at heart.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Trust but verify is probably the good advice.
Yeah.
Although was that a Dick Cheney quote? Nah, that feels dirty. That's That's a tough one to end on. But
Yeah.
thanks for chatting with me, man. That was a lot of fun. And anytime you'd like to come back, please feel free to hit me up. And
For sure, man. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Frame and Reference is an Owlbot production. It's produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan, and distributed by ProVideo Coalition. As this is an independently funded podcast, we rely on support from listeners like you. So if you'd like to help, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/frameandrefpod. We really appreciate your support, and as always, thanks for listening.